So, welcome everyone. Good evening everyone and a warm welcome here at the Democracy Tower. My name is Stephanie Schüppach and I'm the Deputy Director of the Polit-Forum Bern and the Curator of the Democracy Tower. Thank you for joining us here at the Tower and also for joining us online in the live stream. And yeah, I'm glad you found the new space where we're going to have the talk. Oh, now we have some more light, which is also nice. So yeah, we announced the talk tonight at the Alps because we do this discussion tonight as part of the exhibition at the Alps about Greenland. But due to some organizational changes, we had to change the location to our tower. So I'm happy you're here. It could be that some people come a bit later if they were at the Alps first. So, but where are we here? We are here at the Kräfteverhältnisse, the prison tower. And it used to be a prison, as the name says. And now we are a democracy tower, which is run by the association Polit-Forum Bern. And we are an open house for political debates, dialogue, and democracy. And in this sense, we see ourselves as an infrastructure for democracy, as we are convinced that democracy needs safe and open spaces to discuss and exchange. And to enable and facilitate such discussions, we also installed different exhibition elements here in the tower, and they basically deal with three basic questions. Who is included in a democracy? This is the first question. The second question, how and by whom are topics being discussed in society and politics? So the question of who sets the agenda. And the third question is, how do we decide together? So before we dive into tonight's topic, just some organizational remarks. As I mentioned, we also have people watching us in our live stream, so that means we are filming the whole event, including the audience questions, and the video of the event will stay online. Also, the Alps will afterwards produce a podcast of the event using the video. So just please let us know if you don't want to be filmed, not the panelists, please, but so we can take this into account. I think it's okay. So 2 more people joining. This is great. Welcome. You can just come in and have a seat. So also, as I said, we are a space for democracy and discussion. So it's also important for us that you can also ask questions, bring in your remarks and questions. So we will open up the discussion for you, the audience, after about 1 hour of discussion here on the panel. And for those watching us online, you can either ask your question on the chat on YouTube or on Slido, where you don't need Google account or any registration. And the link to Slido you will find in the description of the YouTube video. And then later on, we will bring in your questions from the live stream also here to the analog space. So, as you all know, tonight we'll be speaking about Greenland current politics and its independence discussions, and which all basically have gained a new momentum in the current geopolitical situation and all the global security challenges that we face and all the changing, like every day, like every hour almost, we see a new change. So I'm happy to introduce our 3 panelists. I will start with Ulrik Pramgad. He's joining us virtually tonight from Denmark, and he's a senior researcher for global security and world views at the Danish Institute for International Studies. He has spent almost 2 decades, that would be a bit short, 2 decades in academia working on Greenland's role in Arctic security. And his core interests in research concern how identities are constituted and negotiated by and in opposition to the nation state. And from 2020 to 2024, he also directed the collaborative research project Imagining Independence in the Arctic, Greenland's post-colonial politics of comparison. And in this project, they analyzed with whom and how Greenland compares itself when seeking inspiration for how to develop towards independence. And before that work as a researcher, he also worked with foreign policy for the government of Greenland. Then on my right side and on your left side, we have Kai Gering. He's a professor for political economy and sustainable development at the economics department at the University of Bern. And he's also a member of the interdisciplinary Wyss Academy for Nature, also here in Bern, very close to our tower. And he's a research professor associated with the IFO Institute in Munich, where he also do economic research. And his main research interests are in political economy, development, and public economics. He also investigates about group identities, the distribution of resources, and how they affect political stability and conflict. And so basically he aims to answer scientifically and socially relevant research questions in developing countries, emphasizing on the importance of culture, norms, and history. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
And sitting next to me, we have Bruno Kaufmann. He's a global democracy correspondent and Northern Europe expert. Some of you might know his voice, because since the 1990s, he's a correspondent for Swiss radio and television SRF. And he, as I said, a specialization on global democracy issues and Northern Europe. He was born in Switzerland, in Aarau, but now, since many years, he's been living in Arboga in Sweden. He studied Nordic languages, Eastern European history, and peace studies in Zurich, Uppsala, Gothenburg, and Hawaii. And during the last years, he also has traveled to Greenland repeatedly for research and reports on different aspects of Greenland's politics, democracy, and life in Greenland. And as a democracy activist, he's amongst others also co-founder of the Initiative and Referendum Institute Europe, a board member of the Global Forum of Modern Direct Democracy, and of the Swiss Democracy Foundation. Welcome to you as well, Bruno. So let's start with the first question. We know a little bit now about your backgrounds, but how would you describe your relation to Greenland? Maybe we have Ulrich start.
Yeah, I'll have to start by apologizing that I was really hoping to be with you in person, but this is how it could work out. And I should also say, if technical stuff doesn't work, I do have a separate meeting thing open, so let me know if it doesn't work like this. I was parachuted into Greenland, I think by now 30 years ago, almost 25 years ago. I was hired with my bachelor's degree in Politische.
Oh, now we can't hear you. First technical problem. Let's check. Okay, you're back.
Now?
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, but it sounded fine here. I was hired in 1998 as a personal assistant to the top civil servant in the government of Greenland, without really having any prior knowledge. And in that sense, I was both a solution, because there were not enough Greenlanders with an education, but I'm also in that sense a part of the problem at that time, because there was a lot of people like me coming in from Denmark without really having any knowledge about this society. So I worked there for 4 years, and then I've been trying ever since to understand what it was that I was doing by engaging analytically and theoretically with that.
Thank you very much. Who wants to continue?
I can. Hey Ulrich. I was there 4 years before you. I was first time in 1994 on a trip from Iceland. I was in fact coming to the south of Greenland first time to Narsarsuaq. That's the most southern international airport in Greenland, which is a former base, a military base, and it's basically the place also where the first Vikings were arriving 1,000 years before. Erik the Red, and you know, he was from Iceland, and he wanted to get more people coming to Greenland, and so he when he was telling about Greenland, he was saying it's very green, it's very nice, so come and move here. It was one of the first fake news, but in fact, Greenland was greener at that time. It was warmer than later, so maybe he was also a little bit right. And this was also the place, in fact, in the south of Greenland where then the later Vikings moved forward to North America. We know now that they were far before Columbus in the United States or in Northern America. But this place, this southern Greenlandic place, was for me very impressive to come there, because we arrived there on National Day of Greenland on the 21st of June, the longest day also, and their National Day celebration was a football game, everybody against everybody, and we were part of the game. So it was very inclusive and very welcoming. And after that, I mean, at that time, I already reported for the Swiss radio and also for Tagesanzeiger at that time, and I made reports. I learned how difficult it is to travel in Greenland because there are no roads. So we had to fly by helicopter, and the luggage wasn't arriving. So it was really an impression about this is a big country, few people, and it's not easy to travel around. And since then, I have had the privilege to go to Greenland every second year, I would say, and to discover different parts. Maybe two just reflections about that. One was that I was invited sometimes by the Foreign Ministry of Denmark to come to Greenland for like a media trip. And these trips were quite shocking to me because at that time, the Danish officials accompanying us were not really sensitive to Greenland and to their interests. So in fact, we were also a problem, like you said, Ulrich, in a way, this kind of not very easy approach by Denmark to Greenland, which still today haunts the relationship. But maybe the most impressive time I had in Greenland was when a new airport was opened in the north, in Qaanaaq, which is north of the Thule Air Base. This was the first time you could fly there. But when the weather is bad, you can't move from there anymore. So I was stuck there for about 2 weeks in this most northern place populated in the world. And what I learned there was also very impressive because the people in Qaanaaq, in the north of Greenland, they don't speak the same language as the other people in Greenland. So, for instance, their teaching materials weren't anything value. And also all the teachers were on a polar ice hunt. So they asked me to come to the school and to keep the pupils in order, and I couldn't talk to them. The only thing was that we had a map and we could show two different map things, and it was very impressive to me to be to this place. And after that, I had many different trips to the east, along the coast. So I'm not in a way, I really don't know Greenland so close, but I have seen a lot, I would say. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Kai, were you also a problem in Greenland, or like the two others, or a part of the problem? Or
I guess I was never a problem in Greenland, but partly that's my problem in the discussion because I'm the only one who hasn't been to Greenland. But why am I interested in Greenland? Well, as a researcher, I'm interested in geopolitics and conflicts. I'm interested in resources and resource distribution, and I'm interested in group identities. And Greenland is interesting in all these three dimensions. It has a very interesting, and we all became aware of that, very interesting and important geopolitical position. So we have Russia being interested in it, China being interested in it, Europe and Denmark being interested in it, but having neglected it for a long time, and we've now the US and the new US government being interested in it. So that makes it geopolitically very interesting, and I'm sure we can discuss about this. And then it's interesting regarding its resources, which so far still are largely potential resources or suspected resources that might become more reachable and available with climate change. But they are relevant for Greenland and Greenland's politics, and they're potentially attractive for a lot of other external countries. And then finally, I'm interested in group identities, both also the formation of group identities and the struggle between a region and the central state, but also how external threats are influencing group identities. And for instance, we're showing that group identities are nothing fixed, but they're really depending on which topics are salient, but also related to actually economic dependencies and resources. And also in that regard, I find Greenland a very interesting case, and very much looking forward to the discussion with the panelists here. And your questions, of course.
Thank you very much. I also think we have here a very nice panel with different perspectives and backgrounds. And so, Kai, you already mentioned a little bit, Greenland has been more and more in the focus or interest throughout the world, not only because of the exhibition at the Alps, but mainly due to its geographic location, its resources, and the growing geopolitical importance. So one could say that in the context of heating Arctic, both literally and figuratively, Greenland is a focus of now geopolitical competition and growing confrontation also of major powers, as just mentioned, such as the United States, Russia, or China. And so the island has a high strategic importance due to its proximity to the emerging Arctic shipping routes, its strategic location in relation to security and defense activities, but also to its vast untapped natural resources. And so, as all of you probably heard, US President Donald Trump announced that he wants to purchase Greenland for some reasons that he thinks it's important for safeguarding US national security and also for countering the growing influence of China and Russia in the Arctic. But also we heard that the European Union gets more interested, and in 2024, actually, European Union, they opened an office in Nuuk, also because Greenland could play an important role to support the EU Green Deal's objectives in order to have more sustainable raw materials. But also actually within Greenland, there have been some changes, and we will also speak about this. Following Greenland, they had elected a new parliament this spring, and so also that power dynamic shifted a lot, and majorities in parliament, they shifted, and so one could say this long-standing debate about Greenland's independence gained a new momentum. And so we speak about this. We already heard about the location of Greenland, and now we will try to show you a map. It's going to be up on screens, and in the live stream we'll also see it. It's maybe a little bit small, but it still gives you an impression. And so, yeah, you know Greenland is located in the Arctic. It's the largest island of the world, and this means it's approximately 52 times the size of Switzerland. And today, still about 81% of the surface of Greenland is covered with ice. And so the about 56,000 inhabitants, if I'm right, are mainly living along the coasts. And maybe for comparison, those 56,000 inhabitants is about the same number of inhabitants as the city of Biel has in Switzerland. And geographically, Greenland is actually part of the North American continent. You can see on the map, it's very close to Canada and Alaska. But geopolitically, it's part of Europe. So this already gives a special situation, I think. And then Bruno mentioned it was not so easy to access Greenland for a long time. It was also not so easy to travel around Greenland. So this has also changed with new connections, for example, new flight collections from the US to Greenland, as before it was only mostly via Denmark, which was possible to fly to Greenland, sorry. And so, Ulrich, today you are the one geographically the closest to Greenland. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the importance or influences of Greenland's size and location on the current geopolitical conflicts or politics?
Yeah, again, let me know if the voice doesn't come through. I have a separate idea of how to do it. But basically, Greenland's importance very much depends on where you look at the island from. Of course, climatically, Greenland is basically a very huge chunk of ice, the inland ice. Many of us living around the globe would have problems if that chunk of ice is actually melting. I think you perhaps in Switzerland would be safe, but the rest of us might have trouble if it goes. So in that sense, Greenland is very distinctly of global importance. Geologically, as you already mentioned, the rest of the island is basically a lot of mountains. Some of them look pretty alpine, actually. It's rocks with most of the critical minerals needed for the green transition, for defense issues, etc. They're basically all there. The question is just how to make a business case for digging them up. So that's another perspective that from a lot of places in the world, it would be interesting perhaps to develop those mining projects, but you need to have somewhere to send the rock once you dig it up. As we all know now, probably in security terms, if you look at Greenland from the United States, It's part of, you could call it perhaps a helmet with Alaska on the one side, Greenland on the other side, and Canada in the middle, a helmet that protects the North American continent against anything that would fly in over the North Pole from Russia or China, nuclear missiles. In principle, a nuclear Third World War would take place over the Arctic to a large degree. And then, of course, Greenland is home to the Greenlanders, who, as we know, they have a very ambitious agenda, right? They really want to form their own nation state, and not just that, they want to have a welfare state like the Nordic countries, but it should be a welfare state or nation state that builds more on their own indigenous cultural value, language, and human resources. And as you mentioned, this tiny population is dispersed in 60 settlements or so, and that's just very expensive to run a welfare state under those conditions. So it's really a bold move they want, but I think they are the political discourse in Greenland is really quite nuanced by now concerning how can we leverage the resources we have by hooking up with different outside interests instead of just Denmark, and see how that gets us closer to some kind of self-determination in real terms.
Thank you. Would you add on to this, maybe more from the political perspective also, and changes that have been happening in Greenland, or just react on what's saying?
I mean, Ulrich described the current situation very well. I mean, it's really in a way, I mean, when I was a kid, I saw in the kitchen the world map. I saw this huge white space, and it was fascinating to think what's going on there, and discovering it and seeing it. It's that there are so few people living there, but still all over the place, and having also this kind of history of living basically their own lives for many hundred years, even after the Danish arrived in 1721 and colonized Greenland. The Greenlanders had basically their own way of living, and it was in fact basically the Second World War which changed a lot of that, because at that time Denmark hadn't any possibility to control it, and Denmark was under Germany, and then the Brits and especially the US entered the stage. Even before the US wanted to buy Greenland several times, but it was then when the Greenlanders also became conscious about their value, their strategic value, and after that, you know, when the UN declared that the colonies should be liberated, they should become independent states, Denmark made this trick to say, you are now part of Denmark. So they basically annexed Greenland, not really with the consent of the Greenlanders at that time. So it was a difficult move towards like having their own possibility of running Greenland, and it was only in 1979 then when autonomy was granted. And at that time, I mean, we talked about the EU, at that time Denmark had already joined the European community and the EU, and Greenland was part of that. So one of the first big steps the Greenlandic nation made on their own was to leave the EU. I mean, Grexit was far before Brexit, and they became their own autonomous region and could develop their self-rule, especially after 2009 when they got a new basically constitution of self-rule. And since then, this has been a continuous step. And the big challenge is, in fact, how to organize, how to finance this kind of independent state. But it's a symbol of an indigenous population having their own country, which is very, I mean, not far away from Greenland. There is Nunavut, which is the Canadian Inuit nation, but which has much less, let's say, rights than Greenland has. Last year, I had the first time the possibility to fly directly from Nuuk to Iqaluit, which is the Nunavut capital. And in Canada, they said to me that Greenland is our future in a way. I mean, what's going on in Greenland, that's like 20, 30 years ahead of us. So for many people in the world, especially indigenous people, Greenland is also a role model today. And what's going on now is, of course, therefore also a big interest, not just for the big powers and the world audience, but for Inuit people all over the world.
And you just mentioned, or the question, how to finance the independence or welfare state. This brings me to the economist on the panel, maybe. So what would you, from an economic point of view, how do you maybe evaluate the current situation in Greenland, or what challenges?
I do think this is very important. I mean, there's of course political desirability and then also economic reality in a sense. I mean, if you can think of the success of an independence movement, think of a fire. You might think of identity as igniting the fire, but how strong the fire burns and whether the fire can be sustained depends on whether you have some fuel or some wood. And you can think of that as the economic reality or the resources that a region or a country has. And we've looked at this around the world, many independence movements, and you can look at this in terms of absolute resources and relative resources. And both matters, and I can explain what that means. Absolute resources, you can think of it as like, do I have enough to finance core, what we call public goods? For instance, defense. Do I have in absolute terms enough revenue to finance really core aspect that a state needs to provide? And that is important. Of course, that's crucial. And for Denmark, for Greenland, I think that crucially will depend on these future resource projects and how much revenue in terms of taxes and royalties that will really bring to the Greenlander state. But then there's also a desirability aspect. Of course, you might say, how much do I actually get out in terms of net contributions from the larger entity I belong to? In this case, how large is the grant I get from Denmark? And how much am I actually contributing? And when there I look at the reality in Greenland, it's still that, correct me if I'm wrong on the numbers, Denmark is contributing roughly 500 million euros to Greenland every year. That's about 50% of the government budget of Greenland, 50%. And then if you look at the economy of Greenland, it's 90% still export of fish. So 9 out of 10 export dollars come from fishery. So it's not very diversified. There's not a big service sector or anything. So in terms of having that fuel, having that wood to really sustain the independence movements, I think there's a desire, but the future will probably be crucially decided by the success of these mining projects, which is rare earth, it's a bit of zinc, it's a bit of, I think there's some other resources, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So I guess my prediction is this will be a long-term project, nothing for the short term.
Yep.
Maybe
you
just to add to this, what you're saying about this so-called contribution from Denmark to Greenland, it has also to be seen that, I mean, for a very long time, the Greenlandic economy was basically under Danish rule. So the Denmark got the benefits out of Greenlandic resources. And still today, I mean, the biggest fishery conglomerate, which is making most of the money for Greenland, is a Danish company. It's called Royal Greenland, but it's a Danish company. And so a lot of money goes first to Denmark and then comes back and is said to be a contribution. So many Greenlanders are not very happy with this kind of, you know, let's say paternalistic approach, how they are dealt with. But of course, in fact, the money ways have been structured like that, and now it's a challenge very much how can Greenland enter a level of development which has many layers. I mean, it's about education. I mean, Ulrich was talking about there was a lack of educated people. The university in Nuuk is only about 25 years old, so it's only a few decades that there is really Greenlandic education. And many things have been made. I mean, between 553 and 79, Greenland was basically part of Denmark. and it wasn't supposed to really promote Greenlandic language, etc. So it's a very short time that Greenland has been able to really develop their own institutions, their own education, teachers, and still today, when I'm in a school in Greenland, many of the history books are Danish history books, you know. So it's still in a level where you must say that it's not so easy to have this kind of your own people, your own resources for that. So just now, I mean, today was the opening of the new parliament, and there was the big speech from the new prime minister, and it was a lot about this kind of capability building, which now, and we may discuss that more, which first now, in fact, Denmark is acknowledging that it's not just contributing, but Denmark needs to support the way of Greenland to become an independent state.
I see Ulrich also wanted to add or react.
Yeah, I'd like to actually to complicate life a little bit, because I think you know, Greenland basically took over responsibility and for all their domestic affairs, including actually the Royal Greenland fishing conglomerate. So that's basically a Greenlandic owned company by now. The thing is that they still need to get the fish out of Greenland. They send them to Denmark, and they are then shipped on to be processed in China and Poland and Germany and other places. But it's basically the Greenlanders that's been trying to develop their own fisheries sector, some government-owned, some private companies, since the 80s. And in that sense, they've been negotiating among themselves what is the most important value that we want to get out of this resource. Is it just revenue for the state budget, or do we also want to use these resources to create jobs along the coast? Because in most cases, it'll actually be more efficient just to have a large trawler pick up the fish, freeze it, and send it to China right away. But we need also to have jobs in all these settlements. So that's a discussion in Greenlandic politics, and we're basically seeing the same discussions now around tourism. You know, we have these new airports that are potentially bringing in a lot more tourists. Already that's coming a lot of more Americans, but there are discussions now. Who should make the money from these tourists? Is it, you know, the government-owned hotel chain that's part of Air Greenland? Should it be investors from outside Greenland that are allowed to build hotels and do tours? Or should it be individual local tourist agents in each place? And the same debate in more theoretical terms concerns mining. That should we allow someone to come in from outside and make all the money and decide, in a sense, the future of these communities, or how do we? What should the rules be for these investments? So there's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of conflict within Greenland of how to develop these different resources. But again, as Kai said, the only thing that really contributes at the moment, that's fisheries. And then some Greenlanders actually argue that what we get from Denmark, it's not just a subsidy, it's money we kind of earn by letting Denmark have access to this strategic position and put it in the service of the US.
Kai, you wanted to?
Yeah, I guess when you look at general British movements, it's also important to understand that there's not just black and white. When usually we think of the options being, I stay with my larger country or entity, or I split apart. But if you look at political reality, that's not what usually happens. I mean, yes, there's South Sudan and some cases, but in most cases, for instance, if you look at Scotland, there are options in between, right? There could be devolution, there could be more independence, there could be more decentralization, which is what we also saw in Greenland. And it's not yet obvious what is the perfect model for Greenland. Because just saying this as from the perspective of an economist, if you have an economy that's heavily dependent on one export good, where you have price fluctuations, and then potentially having a second pillar, which is resource production, which could be great, but then we know resource prices also fluctuating a lot, which means your government revenues might be fluctuating a lot. And then having very fluctuating revenues on the one side, but wanting to finance a very generous Denmark-style welfare state on the other side, that doesn't necessarily add up. So I think there is a lot of uncertainty around this. It doesn't mean it's not desirable to move in that direction, but I think also from a welfare perspective, you actually have to consider what are the options on the table. Maybe just one thing to add, what you also said is on the same questions and issues we have with fisheries, like who's actually bringing in the capital, who's owning the companies. As you said, that's also true for mining. But there the real issue is mining is extremely capital intensive. That means in plain terms, you need just a lot of money and you need to take on a lot of risk because mining is really a long-term game. It's the exploration phase. And most things that you explore don't turn out well. Then it's a lot of investment phase and that can take 5 years, 10 years. And only then at some point will you know what's the quality of the resource that you actually have, how costly it is. And then the prices might have changed on the world market. So it's for a country of 50,000, which means probably a small company that could produce that, it's a huge risk, which probably in economic terms is very hard to finance at reasonable costs.
Yeah, I also think it's a question of economic governance. I mean, the idea when you have this kind of resources being available to a country, to a nation, how to deal with it. And I mean, in the Nordic countries, we have different kinds of ways how this has been handled. I mean, when the North Sea oil was discovered in the 70s, 60s, 70s, Denmark and Norway, for instance, choose very different ways of handling. Denmark was giving the license to private companies to develop it and made these companies very rich, while Norway was a little bit slower, but put the money into a state company and now has this oil fund, which is extremely rich, which, I mean, makes now Norway a country which the main problem is that it's too rich, not too poor, and they have problems in dealing with that. But for instance, this inspiration of a state fund to deal with that for future generations, this is now also very much discussed in another country, which was a former Danish colony, the Faroe Islands, which is extremely rich in fishery now and has become a very rich country, but of course have other preconditions to build their nation. I mean, it's 14 islands, and they have now invested a lot of money in building tunnels between the islands, so the people now can travel within a few minutes, and before they basically were isolated. So they do a nation building by tunneling under the sea. That's not an option for Greenland, obviously.
Yeah, so from what I understand, or also when I was preparing for this discussion, like it seems quite complicated, all this process of Greenland getting more autonomy from Denmark also. And Bruno, you mentioned it already, since 2009, there is, with this Act on Greenland Self-Government, there has been actually like more rights for self-determination with Greenland. And so, but for example, still foreign defense and security policy are still actually, controlled by Denmark. But then again, what I found interesting that in 2024, Greenland, they published this strategy, Greenland in the World, Nothing About Us Without Us. And they say it's also a foreign security and defense strategy. And so I think I would also like to speak a little bit about that. So like, how does this go together when Denmark still has to control over security and defense, but then now Greenland has its own strategy to it. So what does it mean practically, basically, for Greenland? So maybe the question is open to all of you, like, what do you think? Why is this strategy published, and what does it say?
I think this is one of the problems or things that's really, really difficult for probably American presidents and others to understand, is that there is this, if you read just the Danish constitution, it's clear that it's the government in Copenhagen that's in charge of foreign and security politics. But if you then open the Danish Parliament's Act on Greenland's self-governance, then there are a lot of rules of how, first of all, how Greenland can deal with international aspects of all the jurisdictions they have. Basically, all domestic affairs, of course, have international aspects. If you do fisheries treaties, if you want to export the fish, if you want to export minerals, if you want to have investments in airplanes, etc., in airstrips, these have international aspects. And Greenland, they can actually, under the Self-Government Act, they're free to deal with these international aspects. Then even at the end of that list, you see, whenever there is kind of real foreign policy, or then Denmark has to involve the Greenlandic government in the negotiations. And what we see recently is that even kind of in the core of national sovereignty in defense matters, it just appears that Denmark doesn't dare to take decisions over the heads of the Greenlanders. Of course, if Denmark did so, it would probably just push Greenland further towards independence, right? Because then it would feel like, okay, we're still a colony. You can sit in Copenhagen and deal with our future without asking us. So in real life, it's really, really a very, very thin sovereignty that Denmark has, even in foreign security and defense policies. And that's why Greenland published this strategy, that it's Greenlanders see it as natural that they have their own voice in the world, and they should, in principle, be able to take even the most basic decisions in these matters also. So it's, from Greenland, this is not weird, but it might be difficult to understand from outside countries trying to deal with Greenland. It took years, a decade ago or two, to make China understand that, okay, it's okay that you deal directly with this Tibet-sized entity, because they're meant to do their own decisions. Mm-hmm. The Americans, of course, understood that under Trump 1, and the European Union is trying to engage Greenland. And that sometimes looks more complicated than it is, because Denmark is formally on both sides of the relation, right? Mm. That Greenland is not a member of the EU, but part of Denmark in a sense, and then Denmark is an EU member. So that's easier, but it looks complex. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Is this maybe also part of this like capacity building that's starting, like having this strategy and say we need a voice at the table or a seat at the table?
Sure.
Or,
I mean, already. I mean, in the early 1950s or late 1940s, Greenland was basically negotiating with the United States about their status. I mean, there was a Danish diplomat doing these dealings in Washington. His name was Kaufmann, and he was basically during the Second World War also in this representation and making agreeing basically on the Greenlandic capacity to be its own country. And then we had seen these shifts of paradigm through the Autonomy Act in 1979, when Greenland became its own parliament and government. And at that time also Greenland was already involved in the Inter-Circumpolar Inuit Council, which was this cooperation between Inuit people from Alaska to northern Europe, all around, and creating also, you can say, this basic idea of rights, indigenous rights as part of international law. And this has created a strong understanding of many Greenlanders that they are really entitled to have these competencies. And the 2009 self-rule agreement, which was also a referendum in Greenland, this also shifted the paradigm in a way that Greenland has the right to declare independence without basically having Denmark as a veto power, potential veto power. And now, of course, the geopolitical change has done a big impact on, let's say, the limitations also of Greenlandic independent streams, because until, let's say, the change of this hard geopolitics with wars, with a limitation of international law. Many Greenlanders dreamed about becoming like a demilitarized area, like Svalbard, Spitsbergen, or Åland Islands. So there was a dream of not being a non-military area, which has changed, of course, a lot now. Now Greenlanders understand it's good to be in NATO, good to have the United States as a protective power, good to be in the Kingdom of Denmark with Danish military support. So I think this has changed also a lot. So there are many, let's say, adaptations to the reality and Greenlanders' needs and have to be pragmatic and realistic. And we see it just now in the new parliament with the new coalition that there is a big shift of generations. Now the leaders of Greenland's government are young people, 30s, 40s, and the older generation, which is fighting for autonomy, they are now very old and not anymore in charge.
And so the younger generation, how is this to understand? In the parliament now, they're looking at like not full day independence, but
some of them were. Some of them, of course, still had education in Denmark, but many of them went to university in Greenland, in Greenlandic. So you have this new generation of Greenlandic educated people, also having no problem in talking Greenlandic. Formerly many Greenlandic, even ministerial, Ulrich may remember that, they were not able to talk Greenlandic. And this has been, of course, a big issue, identity-based issue in many ways. And language is an important layer of that. And now, the foreign ministry in Nuuk, it's such a small team, but they are, I must say, very impressive what they do. They have a delegation to Beijing, Washington, Iceland, Denmark, Brussels. So it's a very small team with a lot of output. And it's a new reality which has now turned into Greenland. And I'm deeply impressed about what this small population is able to do, and they are really now even leading the Arctic Council, which is, the Danish chairmanship, but it's a Greenlandic diplomat which is the chair.
Maybe you can briefly say what's the Arctic Council?
Yes.
You mentioned the Inuit Circumpolar.
Yeah, that's
and the Arctic Council is something.
It's a governmental cooperation. It's basically all the Arctic nations together around the North Pole, which is obviously the US with Alaska, Canada, then Denmark with Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Finland, and Russia. And China and Switzerland are observers.
No, I think many very important points. The geopolitical status has really changed. It's probably a change that will not be reversed so soon, even with a new U.S. government or new U.S. governments, because China is taking a much more active role. We don't know what's happening with Russia. It's very involved in Ukraine, but I think they still have ambitions in Africa. They still have ambitions in the Arctic. And then suddenly, of course, you realize, well, alone as like a state of 50,000 people, we cannot defend ourselves. And if we're honest, also, like, if China or Russia would have real ambitions, also a state the size of Denmark couldn't really defend the Arctic. So not taking the position of Trump, but if we're honest, there are some hard truth in what the US government said when they said, okay, in reality, how could you defend yourselves? Of course, we all hope that will never happen. And truth is also, we don't know. So I think that's something that many Greenlandish politicians now also realized. I would personally hope it's also something that Denmark and the EU realized, that times have changed and we have to take a more open position. And I think Greenland, like many countries, it realized it's good to be part of an alliance. Question is, what is that alliance and who's shaping that alliance? Is it just the US, or do we Europeans also have a say in it? Which I hope we will. But I think, these are big changes, and I think if I can add one thing, and I know I've done a lot of research on identity, and many people think of identity as something that's kind of fixed. But that's not true. Identity is grown. Of course, there's a cultural basis for it. There's a history. and that history is shaped by the relationship with the nation state. It can be shaped by repression, like repression can make group identity stronger. But then also identity depends on what's currently salient. And that means for a while you might base your identity on your colonial history, but now maybe you also discover, hey, you have some cultural aspects in common with the Europeans or with the Americans. And if there's a threat from China and Russia that materializes, maybe that also shapes a bit what aspects of your identity you emphasize. And we don't know. We all hope the future turns out to be more peaceful than we currently can imagine, but it's not a certainty. So we have to be ready for it.
Ulrich, you were one direct, and you also did a lot of research now on identity, and especially also in a post-colonial situation of Greenland. Maybe you can react on what has been said also.
Not because I don't disagree with what Kai is saying on a theoretical level, but I think when particularly when it comes to security in the current debates about Arctic security, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on, in the sense that people, Trump claims that there are Chinese and Russian boats sailing around Greenland that you can see even without a binocular, and that's not true. There are really no military threat to Greenland, but there is a very strong need for the US to be sure that Greenland will never be economically dependent on China. So there's a lot of buzzwords and claims thrown out there that doesn't really hit the reality in a precise way. But the reason I started talking about identity here is that when I read how Greenlandic politicians react to all of this, most of their reactions, in my mind, still try to defend this idea that we should keep our self-determination and we should be able to progress towards formal sovereignty. And as Bruno mentioned earlier, for long, the best way for Greenlandic politicians to talk about security in the security problematic was just to say that should go away. We are peaceful Inuit. We don't do war. When we will be independent. We will be neutral. We will be demilitarized. We won't be a problem. But then, gradually, as Greenlandic politicians have been more integrated in dealing with security politics, they've been talking directly, particularly to the US, and finding out that, okay, that story, when we say that we will be demilitarized, the US finds that that's actually a threat to their security. So over the last 5-7 years, the basic story from Greenland has been that whatever we do when we approach what form of sovereignty we'll have, we will always be part of the Western Alliance, we'll be part of NATO. We won't tell you to get the US bases away. In 2022, when Putin, his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it was very important for Greenland to, first of all, agree to all the European sanctions regimes, but then they found out, okay, that didn't really apply to us because we don't have that kind of relation to Russia. So they came up with more sanctions. They stopped exporting fish to Russia and sold off some subsidiaries of fishing companies, even though it wasn't really demanded by the outside. So it's very important for Greenland to say that we are on the right side of history. That's the Western side. We won't be dangerous for U.S. security. And I think the zenith of this story was in the height of the tumult in January, February. The then Greenlandic Prime Minister Mutti Ehde, he was interviewed by Fox News, and he said that, okay, your security is our security. That's basically the most absolute way of saying to the US, you can do what you want militarily in Greenland. We won't provide a danger to your security. And then, of course, the next step, right now, there is a very big military exercise in Greenland. Different NATO countries are chipping in. The French, the German, the Swedes, and the Norwegian all have capabilities and personnel in Greenland. And of course, that's a way of signaling, and the Greenlanders are applauding that now. They are saying, we understand that the only way to low tension in the Arctic is actually by rearmament now. And that's first, it's a way of saying to the US, to Trump, that okay, maybe we think all your talk about Russians and Chinese threatening Greenland, maybe you think it's silly, but if it's important for you, of course, we'll chip in, we'll do that. But also saying that we're together in this. You cannot just pick one out and take Greenland. If you do that, that's a way of killing the alliance, right? You cannot just pick one. If you're picking a fight, you'll actually lose the confidence of all the NATO allies. So by trying to say that we take your Chinese and Russian worries more seriously than we do, we try to tell you that we take you seriously, we want to chip in, and the Greenlanders accept that, because if they didn't accept, the US wouldn't accept Greenlandic self-determination.
Yeah, I mean, I share this assessment, and it's the big disturbance is, of course, that at the same time as Greenland is adapting to that and accepting this kind of reality or this kind of perspective within the NATO, it's of course extremely disturbing that within this NATO you have one side, the United States, talking to the other side in NATO, which is Greenland and Denmark, that we are ready to take you over if you don't behave, if you don't invest. I mean, the question to Trump about would you even be ready to take Greenland with power has been, of course, not a very friendly signal to Denmark. And for the Danish government and for Danish Foreign Office, this has been a quite challenging time since Trump did that. And what we can see now is really a new way of how Denmark and Greenland are looking towards another. I mean, Mette Frederiksen, the Prime Minister, she was already before maybe the most understanding and open leading politician in Denmark vis-à-vis the Greenlandic approach to independence and to self-rule, and she has been very, very eager to adapt to that, to make the Greenlanders feeling more at home with Denmark. And I mean, next week in Nuuk there will be a big ceremony where the Danish Prime Minister and the Greenlandic head of government will do this ceremony about saying sorry to the people who have been, a part of this program to make the Greenlandic women not able to get children, which has been a big issue and which has for a long time seen a discussion about how can these people be compensated, and there are court cases going on. So what we see now is in real time that these changes are moving the way of how also Greenland and Denmark are dealing with each other very much. And of course the last election was very much an expression of that people could understand we need to approach these issues in a different way than before Trump made this kind of not very friendly approach.
So, did you not hear us, Ulrich, now, or there was some problem?
There's a very, very bad sound from, I think it's only when Bruno's talking, but I'm not sure.
Sorry. Maybe my English is
disturbing the mic.
Yeah.
Oh, it's your Greenlandish.
Yeah.
Okay, no, we hope it will be better again. Our technician has maybe a check. And so, we were speaking just about the identity, and maybe also from what I hear now, it was that it seems like Greenland is also getting more power for their interests now, being in all this different kind of aspects of interest from the outside, so they can get maybe a stronger position in their way to sovereignty and independence. Have you seen this in other context maybe of independence movements, Kai, that how external factors maybe add on to the independence movements, or how would you compare maybe Greenland?
Maybe even more general, geopolitically, of course, it can be a political advantage for you as a country or government if several other bigger powers are interested in you, be it due to resources or your geopolitical position or some other issue. So we know this from studying, for instance, countries that receive development aid. Usually there are some conditions attached to aid, but if you have many countries who all want to invest or give aid to your country, there are on average fewer conditions attached because they all want to help you, which of course mean they all have a strategic interest in your country as well. So I think generally it can be an advantage for Greenland. I think it was, and it was perceived as one. But of course, that doesn't have to hold true in a war where you have big powers who see each other in competition, right? Because it might be when really the competition geopolitically between China and the US is intensifying, that could mean it's just not acceptable to, for instance, take Chinese investment. And I think that's what we saw a bit, where also Denmark was pushing back, the US was pushing back. So it's not obvious how much Greenland can actually exploit this. But I think...
Yeah, I mean, you had this example about 5 years ago when there was the discussion about developing the airport infrastructure in Greenland, that there was a discussion about who is paying for that. And I mean, there were interests and negotiations in a way with China for that, and that created in Denmark an understanding that we have to invest in order to avoid China to take over this kind of sensitive infrastructure. And now this week, for instance, there was a new agreement between Denmark and Greenland about investing even more into infrastructure, building an airport on the east coast, a new harbor in the south, and also, for instance, paying for hospital costs of Greenlanders which needs treatment in Denmark, which is quite a high cost, a lot of money. And this creates now, I mean, the intention of this agreement is to support Greenland in becoming more well prepared, you can say, for being independent.
Mm-hmm. Ulrich, you are with us again. I think there was a slight problem. Not sure if he can hear us. Probably not yet. Okay. Let's see if we can solve it better.
I'm sorry, I'm getting mostly statics, so I can hardly hear you.
We didn't change anything, so... but is it still okay or difficult to continue?
It sounds like there's a bumblebee in your mic.
Okay.
In all the sound I get from you, I'm sorry.
Maybe I can try to add to it. I mean, I think what helps Greenland is definitely that it's overall still quite small in terms of population. So it's not very expensive for Denmark to now pop up its support. Right, it's 500 million euros roughly per year, but that's still not a lot even for a country the size of Denmark. And it would also not be a lot for the EU or others to, let's say, help and invest more. So I think that can be helpful overall. And I think overall also now, I think European countries, Denmark, they have woken up a bit. They have also internalized that you need to have a geopolitical strategy, that you need to invest in security, that you need to strengthen your alliances. So I do think in that respect, that is very positive for Greenland. What it means for like full independence, I think that's hard to tell, but I think it's definitely generally a good thing for Greenland.
Yeah. Ulrich, is it better or? Okay, we try to open maybe some questions from the audience.
I've only got statics. Whenever one of you speak, it sounds like, so I can't hear you.
Okay, let's see if it works with the questions from the audience. We open up now. Let me maybe go to them.
Maybe it's better now with the mic. Can you understand?
Kannst du das für den Laptop auf mute.
Can you understand? No, he doesn't. Okay, but anyway, I would like to take up some of your introductory remarks, both of you, talking about identity and local diversity. And we were just now listening to you and having a picture, a very great big picture of the global strategic and global security and foreign policy. And for me, it sounded like security is kind of reduced to the military or the national security question. But you were mentioning the diversity inside Greenland, the different identities in the north, in the south, even with very different languages. So my question would be, and you as an economist, me as a social anthropologist, I would like to know more about how do they deal at the very local level, the community level. Do they have a budget? Do they have a council? How do they deal? How do they speak out? How can they express their needs, which are maybe completely different in terms of security? Their security needs are probably different than the defense from the United States. So I think it must be also tackled like a contradiction or a field of tension between the local identities and this national identity challenged also by the new situation, global situation.
Yeah, if I may add some observations with my visits to different places across Greenland, it's in a way impressive, of course, to understand that the Greenlanders have been able to live in this environment for so many thousand years, while the Vikings came and then they didn't felt it was green enough and nice enough, so they left again, and then many hundred years later the Danish came and other foreigners. But the Greenlanders were able to live in this environment, so they developed the resilience of living with the conditions there in a extremely impressive way through, of course, hunting and fishing, which was the basic way of surviving, but also having structures and cultures and communities which were able to deal with that. And it's also that through the entering of geopolitics, security politics, and then the idea of Denmark to create a modern state, this has been extremely disruptive to the Inuit society and created a lot of problems. I mean, in Nuuk there was a big housing project in the 60s, 70s, where several percentage of Greenlandic population was put into. Some of these houses are now replaced, but it was, of course, a very brutal way of trying to make Greenland a modern welfare state. And today, you can say that this kind of challenges and problems are still very, very important. I mean, we have a certain modernity and elite in especially the capital, which is growing. So 1/3 of the population now lives in Nuuk and the environment, while many smaller places, they are struggling with this kind of ability to finance themselves and to have enough money. Many Greenlanders are very poor. They can never travel. I mean, traveling within Greenland is expensive. Going from the north to the south is much more expensive than traveling from Nuuk to Copenhagen or New York. So these people cannot, in a way, take part in this kind of modernity. At the same time, their possibilities to develop their own modern ways of living with tourism and all these kind of things is very limited. So there's a lot of challenges coming into the Greenland with tourism. But also, I mean, in Nuuk now, there is a lack of manpower for all these new projects. So there are a lot of, you can say, immigration now from countries like the Philippines or Thailand coming into Nuuk. So you have, in a way, this kind of globalized place. And then you have really like the very traditional old places along the coast. And this is a challenge for a country which is so huge. I talked about the Faroe Islands before, that they were able now to create something like a nation state through their infrastructural thing, so they can interact in a way which Greenlanders cannot, and I guess will not, even if the internet, I mean, when I was there in 1994, they just have got TV. I mean, before there was like the news programs were sent by ship, by cassettes, or by helicopters. So it was a very different kind of life, which has changed and is a big challenge.
Yeah. I guess he's the actual expert on Greenlandish identity, but I can say something more general about it, and I think that has some insights for Greenland. I guess, I mean, the way we generally think about this is, why do we have a state? One of the key reasons for having a state is that you want to provide public goods. It could be defense, but it can also be welfare, it can be infrastructure, and there are big economies of scale, which is why it's a public good, because it's better if we do it all together. If we would all do it individually, we wouldn't have any roads, we wouldn't have an army, we wouldn't have a welfare state. But then, of course, the problem is you need to agree on this. You need to agree, and you also need to trust the others that this works. And this is where preferences and identity comes in. Like we see that states, countries that have a stronger identity usually also have a stronger welfare state. One reason the US has a rather weak welfare state is that it's a very heterogeneous country with a very low trust level. And of course, if you have a very country that's quite fragmented, that has a complicated history, probably different languages, it's way harder to build up the trust, to build up that strong common identity, to then actually agree on the public good provision, on the welfare state. So I think in terms of Greenland, that's also a key challenge that they're facing.
So, okay.
But I would also be happy to hear actually.
Yeah, this is a little bit
Ulrich.
the problem because he cannot hear us well. It's a lot of static, so we have to type in the question and he will answer it. So I think the
question was like, what specifically, how do the local differences and local cultures in Greenland influence Greenlandish identity and the independence movements? No.
Now we also can't hear Ulrich. Is your mic on? My mic
which
is
good. I think he studied, but...
Okay. Okay, maybe we move on to the next question and then I will type this in. But now we have a problem also, we cannot see you. So it's only your mic's disturbing, mine is fine, apparently. So do we have a next question or maybe from the online viewers? No? And just maybe keep the question short so I can type it also.
Thank you so much for the discussion so far, and also thanks for the great exhibition at the Alps. It gave really a good impression of the Greenlandic traditions and ways of life. And now to follow up on, before we had kind of the personal views, and now I would like to know how it translates to politics in Greenland. So how do those social identities you mentioned, how have they influenced parliamentary elections? Like how important was the threat from the US, from Trump on the elections? And how much does the Greenlandic identity play a role in the politics?
Yeah, I mean, the elections were taking place in March, which was basically the high point of this kind of pressure from the US. I mean, this campaign from the US started very early on, even before Trump was inaugurated. On November 28, the new airport in Nuuk was opened. A few days later, the Trump plane arrived, and Eric Trump and some other guys came out and distributed money and invited people to the dinner in a hotel. And it was very strange. It felt like a very dilettantic way of hybrid warfare against Greenland, and they made some social posts, you know, and it was very, very strange. But at the same time, it started, and this is maybe the big thing of the Trumpian way of doing it, this kind of attentive catching thing, but it's almost a disturbance to what's happening on the ground, because now since the first Trump administration, there is a consulate an American consulate in Nuuk, and this consulate has now got the job, we know that from different files from intelligence, to really register people's opinion on the US. So there has been a lot of discussions about this kind of not very friendly way of trying to interfere within Greenlandic politics. And this created, for the first time, I would say basically, the Greenlanders were always agreeing on the step forward to independence, autonomy, and self-rule. In the referendums there was 2/3, 3/4 of majority for this. But now also, until now, there was a big division between, let's say, traditional, let's say, autonomists and more, let's say, progressive forces, and now we got a big agreement on that you need to deal with this in a calm way, not getting too much excited about the perspectives of this kind of conflict between US and Denmark. So we have now we have a big coalition, almost a Swiss-style coalition in Parliament, with 28 members, while just 8 members from a more independentist party are in opposition. So this is a new situation for Greenland, and the localist approaches are still very weak. There are local communities, municipalities with their own mayors, but they have quite limited capacities. And it's also a problem. For instance, I was meeting a mayor, or I had an agreement to meet the mayor in the south of Greenland last year in September, and when I arrived, she just came back from Nuuk after sitting 7 days on the airport to wait for a plane because the weather was bad. So it's not easy, to deal with that, and you are out of your place, and it's really, I would say, it's such a challenge to create this kind of modern democracy in Greenland. They have put together different communities, which is now divided again. So finding the right way of governance for Greenland is still a big challenge. There are a lot of good ambitions, but again, it's how to do it in a way forward, especially if there will be good economic preconditions. As we have said, how to agree on using these revenues, because Greenland, of course, potentially is an extremely rich country with a lot of possibilities.
So maybe we try to have Ulrich first react on this question, on how the social identities translate to politics maybe, and how the threat from Trump maybe influenced elections. Now you're on mute, Ulrich, so... Okay, we have several problems. Now we also cannot hear you anymore. Milena, can you check if you have... Well...
Is the US Embassy involved?
Maybe, I don't know.
It's critical, who knows? Maybe, if I may, I think you said several very interesting things, and also in the end you mentioned the distribution of the resources and how to actually, what that means politically. And I think there we really have to be aware that there's something that we call in research the resource curse. If you look at most countries in the world that are rich in resources, they're not particularly rich. Maybe there are a few rich people, or there are a few companies that became very rich, but most people didn't get rich from resources. There are also many structural features related to incentives, but there are also political challenges, right? Because it can create a lot of anger. Let's say resources are very geographically concentrated. We know from some good empirical studies now that, let's say you have one region that has all the resources, but that means also the negative externalities. Let's say you have rare earth, you had issues around uranium in Greenland, and that also creates a lot of environmental problems, which means you have the production in a certain place, you have also the environmental problems in that place, but then there's the question, who gets the revenues? Why should the central government get all the revenues if all the problems are there? Or generally, how do you distribute that? And then, of course, in a sense, we look at Norway, and Norway is always the poster child, and in Norway that works. But still, of course, that's not fully true. I talk to Norwegians, and they say, we're also quite different. We're very different local identity. But to be honest, if you compare it to most other countries in the world, Norway is a very homogeneous country. It's also very densely populated. People are also ethnically quite similar. So Norway has many advantages, and they were also quite developed when they really had this resource boom already. So there are many reasons why things worked out in Norway, but there are also many reasons why they don't work out in many other countries. So I think it's probably advisable if Greenland approaches this with actually a feeling of calmness and patience, and not rushing towards independence, and also not rushing to become rich quickly. So I think that's probably what I, as an external advisor, would also tell them.
Yeah. Do we have more questions? I think we need to leave Ulrich out because there's several problems now. But so you two can answer, and he will come to Switzerland the next time. Any more questions? No?
Thank you.
Why? So maybe we will round up the discussion anyway, maybe with, we already had some outlooks, what would be the expectations for Norway. So
Greenland.
Sorry, now I am in Norway. I was just in Norway last week, and that's where we met. So, okay, sorry, now I'm getting confused as well. I apologize. And okay, so now what would be your outlook for Greenland? Like, we had the different aspects now heard from all of you.
Yeah, I mean,
one sentence or two
yeah,
sentences.
I mean, one very interesting, I think, perspective is now that in Greenland and also in Iceland, in fact, there is an idea that the issue of European Union membership should be reevaluated. I mean, for a long time, this wasn't really an option. It wasn't seen as necessary. It was also seen as I mean, too dangerous to their interests. But now with the United States being so aggressive and unpredictable, it's also a conversation about why not becoming like parts of the European Union as independent states. Iceland is, of course, already, but also as Greenland. So being involved, I mean, in the Danish kingdom, like, I mean, there are other examples where you have this kind of free association under a king, and I think the Greenlanders are not really against the king of Denmark. He's very popular there. So I could imagine that there is one of the strategies that Greenland is maybe reevaluating its leaving the European Union under these circumstances, especially because Iceland will have a referendum in 2027 about opening negotiations. And if that would be a yes, and Iceland is something like a role model for Greenland, I think that could be a conversation and bringing Greenland more close back to Europe, while it, of course, remains where it is. Well.
And Kai?
Yeah. No, I also think, I mean, if you imagine you have 3 badly behaving bullies in the room, suddenly the big guy, the big calm guy in the corner might not appear as bad anymore. So in that sense, if you have China, Russia, and the US all engaging in their power politics, I also think relationship with the EU and Denmark mostly being senior as a part of the EU, that would probably be crucial and maybe become a more interesting strategic option for Greenland. I also think for the European Union that would be good. So I hope we're also smart in dealing with that and not trying to now think, oh, no, they have a strategic interest in us, but rather approaching this from, let's say, not a paternalistic, but a cooperative perspective, where we really say, how can we help Greenland become stronger politically with regard to state capacity, but also maybe to developing these resources that we also need for our energy transition here, for instance. So I think there are mutually beneficial options on the horizon, and I think if Denmark, the EU, and also Greenlandish politicians approach this in a calm and cooperative way, maybe also discovering actually there is a somewhat joint identity compared to the others, to these bullies outside. Maybe there's also a chance in the current geopolitical tensions.
Maybe just one more word more about this situation. It's, of course, we are always talking now about the United States and Europe, but I mean, the closest neighbor of Greenland is Canada, Nunavut. As the connections now have been reopened, that you can fly from Nuuk to Iqaluit in Nunavut, it's just less than 2 hours. And I was on one of these flights last year, and it was very impressive that, you know, in this plane there were many people saying, you know, my family is living in Nunavut, we speak the same language, we can understand each other, and for decades we were forced to travel basically around the world, first to Denmark, then somewhere in Europe, to the United States, Canada, to meet your neighbor, and now it's reconnecting. And these kind of connections, I think, are very important for the identity of a future independent Greenlandic state.
Yeah, thank you. So last try, Ulrich, for your outlook, if we can hear you or not. No. We can't hear you.
Poor Ulrich.
Can type it in the chat if you like, or otherwise we see you next time in Switzerland. So let's wait. If he types something in the chat, I can bring it in. So otherwise, I thank you very much for coming, for joining, despite all the technical problems. And I thank you for listening and your questions. And again, I apologize for the technical issues. Usually this works quite fine, but today not. So, okay, he will send a conclusion. We will try to share it. And so for the people who joined us here, we have a little sweet thank you, like our Ara stones or tower stones. Ulrich, you can pick one up next time.
So you need to come.
Yeah, intentional. We need to have another talk about Greenland. So the video will stay online as already mentioned. And so for the people here, we invite you now to continue the discussion in the analog space of the Democracy Bar, which is one floor below. And for the people watching us online, I say goodbye to you. And to round up the evening, let's have an outlook on the program here at the Tower and then also afterwards at the Alps. Here at the Democracy Tower, we have an ongoing exhibition on AI and democracy and the question, what kind of future do we want for our democracies or societies when artificial intelligence is gaining more and more importance. And also, so on October 8th, we're going to have a discussion about the influences of AI on culture and cultural production. And now I would like to give the microphone to Carmen. Maybe you can come up here so people can see you also in the stream to give us some news about the program at the Alps and the Greenland exhibition.
Am I now way too big?
No, it's fine.
Okay, it's fine. Yes, our exhibition, as I think you mentioned it already, will stay till the 16th of August, 26. So you have a lot of time to come and visit. And we have also 2 events, upcoming events, that I think could contribute to all this discussion very well. I will quickly let you know. This is one on the 22nd of October. There we got a historian of science, Dania Achermann. She's from St. Gallen. And she will trace how Greenland has long been a projection surface for science, resource exploitation, and geopolitical ambitions. So what we already talked a little or a lot. And on the 27th of November, we do a collaboration with the Reportagen magazine. And there will be a journalist, Marzio Mian. And he is, I think, right now, currently in the North Water, Polynia, if I'm saying it right. And he will talk about this and let us know, what he's researching. I think that's everything for me.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Also for the great collaboration on this event, and to all of you for coming here, and Kai as well, and Ulrich for joining us online. And also next time we hopefully have you here in Switzerland. And so now I wish you all a nice evening. Thank you very much.